revelation from a Prime Minister.
Let me reiterate, I want to be absolutely crystal clear.
That will send shockwaves around the world.
It was understood at the highest levels that this was almost certainly.
What did Canberra really know?
If that's true, then that would have to point to some kind of cover-up. It seems a key piece of evidence, though, doesn't it? Did they ever mention fire on board? Hijack? Terrorism?
And the pilot bombshell.
We'd also tracked down the mystery woman, a woman about 20 years his junior.
Maybe he wasn't a good family man?
2 days before the flight, she'd sent him a message.
That's about 1,000 kilometres an hour. This is going to hurt.
So do you know where it is?
Yeah. At my house.
It's not much further.
No, it's not much further.
How can you leave our families out there?
Find out what went wrong and make sure it doesn't happen again.
Well, let's get out and explore it.
The untold story of MH370 continues tonight.
Right of takeoff.
It's 12:42 in the morning, local time in Kuala Lumpur, when Malaysia Airlines flight MH370 takes off, bound for Beijing. None of the 239 passengers or crew are ever seen or heard from again. And the mystery surrounding the plane's disappearance has only deepened as the years have passed. Part of what forms the whole MH370 mystery are all the wild conspiracy theories about what might have happened to it. All you need to do is look online to see some of the more colourful explanations. That it's in the Cambodian jungle, or was sucked into a black hole. Maybe even the Russians have got it. But experts, citing real-life examples, have narrowed it down to a handful of likely scenarios. All of them end up in the same place. How it got there is what divides opinion. Captain Zahari Ahmed Shah was a 53-year-old pilot with 18,000 flying hours. MH370 was his final flight. He lived here in this gated community in Kuala Lumpur's upmarket Shah Alam. He was a married father of 3 adult children and a grandfather, known as Ari to his friends and Uncle Ari to his many nieces and nephews.
He's an intriguing figure. He's got quite a lot of aspects to him. By all accounts, he was a superb pilot, absolutely full of capacity to train others, and his very seniors in his 50s, highly respected, highly liked. He seemed to be a fun guy, by all accounts.
Hi everyone, this is a YouTube video that I made as a community service.
In his downtime, Captain Shah also made videos for his own YouTube channel. In the background here is his home flight simulator.
He's a jovial person, a very friendly guy, very easily approachable. He's also a good family man, a good father to his three children.
This is young Zahari Shah back in his early flight training days, when he was chosen by Malaysia Airlines to join its cadet pilot program. His love of flying is well documented. He even built and flew model aircraft in his spare time.
Is it possible that he hijacked the plane and killed those people?
I absolutely don't agree with that.
Why?
I don't see him as a person who could do that.
Zahari was politically active and a distant relative of Anwar Ibrahim, the country's opposition leader who was convicted of sodomy a day before the doomed flight.
He was said to be quite upset by that verdict. Now, he was active in the party, but again, there's no claim of responsibility in any of this. But that's one lead. Again, would it be enough for him to take such drastic action without saying he did it? Difficult to say.
It's also claimed Zaharie had affairs and his marriage was in trouble, all denied by his family and friends.
A woman about 20 years his junior, with whom he had clearly a fairly close relationship, she denied that it was of a sexual nature, but she said she broke this relationship off some months before the flight, but 2 days before the flight sent him a message, a WhatsApp message that she wouldn't divulge. So there, a lot of tantalizing things that go in various directions. But again, I don't think there's any smoking gun in any of this.
Do you know that to be true? That maybe he wasn't a good family man?
Well, I will take that with a pinch of salt, really, because I believe that the media has sensationalized and misled the story into believing that he has to paint a picture that he has a troubled family life. I don't believe that.
The man had 2 houses and 3 cars, and there's no evidence that he had life insurance. He had some political interests in Malaysia, but if he was doing it for a cause, then surely that cause would have been made public. So none of the theories are perfect. All of the theories about its loss are flawed, but the end line, the end of the line is the aircraft did change dramatically its course and headed out to sea to a place where it would be very, very difficult to find.
When I first heard of this disaster, I rang the Malaysian Prime Minister and I offered Australian assistance. That assistance was very gratefully accepted. It became apparent after a few days that the plane had followed a very different course, and we dramatically scaled up our involvement in that search.
MH370 vanished during Tony Abbott's tenure as Prime Minister, a time when he enjoyed what he calls a strong and constructive relationship with his Malaysian counterpart, Najib Razak.
He was a good friend to Australia.
Since then, embroiled in an unrelated corruption scandal, Razak's career has imploded.
I don't comment on the domestic issues which have since brought him low, but he was a good partner and he was a good friend to Australia.
While Captain Zaharie Shah's family and friends may well be certain of his innocence, Tony Abbott was left in no doubt about who was responsible.
It was pretty obvious that someone had been in charge of that aircraft. The aircraft do not do the kind of thing that aircraft did unless someone is at the controls. My understanding, my very clear understanding from the very top levels of the Malaysian government is that from very, very early on here, they thought it was murder-suicide by the pilot.
They said that to you?
I'm not going to say who said what to whom, but let me reiterate, I want to be absolutely crystal clear. It was understood at the highest levels that this was almost certainly murder-suicide by the pilot, mass murder-suicide by the pilot.
How long after the plane disappeared did that information become clear to you?
Within a matter of a week or so.
What's interesting about this admission is that the Malaysians never named or blamed Captain Zaharie, at least not publicly.
Despite media reports that the plane was hijacked, I wish to be very clear. We are still investigating all possibilities as to what caused MH370 to deviate from its original flight path.
Even when Malaysia finished its final report in 2018, it wasn't willing to point the finger.
The team is unable to determine the real cause for the disappearance of the MH370.
Malaysia's official report into MH370 provided nothing substantial. It was vague on detail, but most significantly, gave the pilot the all clear. The report said it couldn't have been Zuhari because his mental state was satisfactory and his ability to handle stress at work was good. He had no history of apathy or anxiety, nor were there any behavioural changes that raised any concerns.
What was the reasoning that the Malaysians gave you?
Well, it was crystal clear to me that they had a very clear understanding that this almost certainly was what had happened.
Did they point to any evidence at that point? Did they say, we found this or we heard from this?
No. When you're dealing at this level, if you are told that something is the clear understanding, you don't need to go into a vast amount of detail.
If that's true, then that would have to point to some kind of cover-up.
Look, that's not my assumption at all. And I've read all these stories that the Malaysians allegedly didn't want the murder-suicide theory pursued because they were embarrassed about one of their pilots doing this. I have no reason to accept that.
Why didn't you say something about this at the time?
Well, at the time, and I had a lot to say about this at the time, but at the time, I was focused on finding the plane.
7 days after MH370's disappearance, Malaysian police searched Zuhari's home and find, on his flight simulator, practice runs to the southern Indian Ocean just 1 month before the doomed flight. It's a stunning piece of evidence which isn't made public until it's leaked 18 months later.
Now, the significance of that is that there's nowhere to land anywhere near where that track took it at the end. There are no islands, there's nothing. And so by practicing that flight on his flight simulator, he was practicing what could only be a suicide murder flight.
You must also remember that there were 2,700 flight simulations in his simulator, and only a few out of these 2,700 end up in South Indian Ocean.
But doesn't that strike you as unusual?
Nothing unusual, because it's very common for pilots to practice ditching.
But why not ditch somewhere closer?
Well, I do not know. I cannot explain why he chose South Indian Ocean, of course.
Look, that sort of stuff is not something that as Prime Minister you would expect to be officially briefed on.
It seems a key piece of evidence, though, doesn't it? And backs up that theory that it was murder-suicide.
Well, the most obvious explanation is invariably the best explanation.
Did they ever mention fire on board?
That's not something that was ever discussed with me.
Hijack, terrorism?
Not something that was ever discussed with me. The clear understanding from very early on was that this was mass murder-suicide by the pilot.
Grace Nathan has every reason to feel anger towards the pilot. Her mother was on board MH370. But a lawyer by trade, she won't accept Mr. Abbott's claim at face value.
Well, I find it hard to believe because it's still not supported by any evidence. Even if the Malaysian government were to say that, then what did they base that off of? What information is it that they have that led them to that conclusion that they haven't shared with us now?
Do you blame the pilot?
While I'm open to the possibility it could have been a pilot, I do not blame the pilot.
Grace Nathan is stuck in the past. Memories of love and loss are on a painful, permanent loop.
Well, my mom was like the center of the family, the glue that held everyone together. She was always at home, so home was associated to mom. To mom, wherever mom was, that was home.
How often do you think about her?
Every day.
Grace was sitting her final law exams in England when she received a distressing midnight phone call from her father in Beijing.
And he said, book a flight and come home. And I asked him why, what happened, and then he said something happened to the plane your mother was on. And I just remember at that very moment, like I dropped the phone, like the phone just fell out of my hand.
And our thoughts and prayers are with all affected passengers and crew and their family members.
Grace may reserve judgment for the pilot, but she does blame the Malaysian government.
I think I was angry from the very beginning because the story kept changing, and we found out that there was a lot of mistakes made by like the military, the Malaysian government, and things that they could have done differently that would have, I mean, even if they couldn't recover the plane, at least we would have known where it was, because we know that things are a lot worse than what they could have been because of the incompetencies.
Somehow, Grace held herself together. She clung to the hope it was all a misunderstanding and the plane would eventually be found intact. Until the flaperon washed up on Reunion Island.
It's clearly from an aircraft, and the barnacles indicate it's been in the ocean for some time.
For me, that was the straw that broke the camel's back, because I think that was the first time I had to acknowledge that, yes, maybe the plane did crash.
Despite evidence stacked up against the pilot, Grace still doesn't entertain criticism, but rather shares concern for his family, who she believes are also victims.
So you're still willing to give the pilot the benefit of the doubt?
Yes, definitely. Like, that is really unfair to just pin it on the pilot when you don't know for sure, because that affects a lot of people, especially his family, his children.
I'm an adventurer, I'm an explorer, and different people call me the debris searcher or the wreck hunter or the real-life Indiana Jones, because I'm finding things that other people are unable to find.
The beachcomber?
The beachcomber, that's fine.
Blaine Gibson is an unlikely hero, a lawyer by trade who sold his house in California and spends the money seeing the world.
It's been my goal since I was 7 years old to go to every country in the world.
How many countries are you up to?
185.
185?
There are 195 in the world, independent countries. I've been to 185 of them.
Gibson became obsessed with the MH370 mystery, so he flew to the countries where oceanographers predicted debris could wash up. In Mozambique, country number 177 on his list, he found the plane's no-step panel after searching with a local fisherman.
Suddenly, Suleiman, who's the boat owner, called me over. He said, "Blaine, is this the plane? Is this Malaysia 370? And it was a gray triangular object, and I walked over to him, and it said no step on it. And then I knew that it was aviation.
They analysed it.
And they confirmed it, and they used the words almost certainly from Malaysia 370.
So, no step was a big step in the search.
No step was a big step, yes.
That big step gave Gibson momentum. He was hooked. Next stop, Madagascar.
On the first day, we found 3 pieces of debris.
Which were?
One was the panel that goes right above the flaperon, and it was also from the right side of the plane. And then at the end of the day, it was the piece that, holding it in my hands, it made me cry. It broke my heart. And that was the case around the TV screen on the back of the seat in front of you. This is a piece of a seat from the main cabin I'm holding right in my hands. And this is probably the last thing that somebody saw.
To date, 32 pieces that are believed to be from MH370 have been found at different locations around the world.
So you've got a debris field in 6 countries: Tanzania, South Africa, Mozambique, La Réunion, Mauritius, Madagascar.
Blaine, with the help of locals, has collected over half of them. 17 pieces of debris, either suspected or now confirmed, to be from the wreckage of MH370.
What I have found makes it very clear to me that the plane crashed in the southern Indian Ocean somewhere north of, say, 36 degrees south latitude. A lot of people are saying, oh, the main cabin is intact underwater somewhere. No, it's not. This plane tragically shattered on impact. This plane is not intact underwater. All of the debris that I have found and held in my hands says to me the word shattered. Pieces of the interior cabin, pieces of the tail, pieces of the wing, the landing gear door. So we know that it was a very high-speed impact.
It is probably the most difficult search in history.
What does it say to you, though, that after all this time, it still hasn't been found?
Look, it says to me that we should still be looking. It says to me that if at first you don't succeed, try and try again, because this is not something that a decent people, and I'm not just referring to Australia here, I'm referring to all of the countries who had citizens on that plane. This is not something that a decent people can let go.
Coming up.
That's about 1,000 kilometres an hour. This is going to hurt.
My very clear understanding from the very top levels of the Malaysian government, they thought it was...
Were you told?
I don't recall ever being told that explicitly.
So someone like Byron Bailey might be right.
Yes.
As far as I'm concerned, it's game over. We know where it is. We've always known where.
It wasn't so long ago that Malaysia Airlines was ranked among the top 10 in the world. It was a great source of national pride. But after 2014, following 2 fatal crashes, it slipped way down that list. To be fair, one plane was shot down over a war zone, while the other was the likely doing of a rogue pilot, so the company can't be completely to blame. But investigations were bungled in a PR nightmare that lurched from one problem to the next, and a once mighty brand is now permanently stained.
When Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 disappeared from radar screens in the early hours of the 8th of March 2014, Captain Zahari Shah was the pilot in command.
My very clear understanding from the very top levels of the Malaysian government is that from very, very early on here, they thought it was murder-suicide by the pilot.
This is what then Prime Minister Tony Abbott was told in private about a week after the plane vanished. It's information that's critical in determining where, in the southern Indian Ocean, MH370 is likely to have ended its flight.
Did you share that information with Warren Trust, say, or your government departments to help define the search area?
What I believed was happening, and what I certainly expected to happen, was that the search would cover the maximum possible range of that aircraft. I had no reason to think that the search was being restricted on the basis that the pilot had nothing to do with it.
In the early stages of the search, the Malaysian government believed it was a suicide mission and that the Australian government was told about that. Were you aware of it?
Well, it was always considered that one of the possibilities and probabilities that it was a murder-suicide.
Warren Truss was Federal Transport Minister and Deputy PM at the time. He was one of the key decision-makers